Hey there, so I am about to head out into the garden this evening and gonna do a few garden chores. It gets kind of loud out there sometimes this time of year because we have so many air conditioners and so many garden bugs. Guess it's loud in here too. We've got the kitties. It's almost your season. Pan looks very seasonally appropriate in the fall. But anyways, I wanted to just sit down and chat through kind of some of the plans, what's sort of next over the next few weeks, because we're actually, as we get into the beginning of September for the fall garden, for me, it starts to be a very important garden time. So starting a fall garden, I played around with it over the last few years, and I found that if you start spinaches and lettuces and things too early, like in August, they don't do well. They just bolt, or they get kind of like weird and leggy. They don't grow well at all. But there's this sweet spot, there's this season right about, like the first, maybe not the first week of September, cat hair, but the second and third week of September. If I plant my lettuces and arugula and stuff like that in those weeks, it's a really, really good time to get those things started in my zone. So I am zone 7A. I'm in Virginia. That kind of maybe helps if you're in the States. But so my first frost is end of October. Sometimes we get a little bit more time. Sometimes it takes a little while. And then my last frost is beginning of April. But there's this period of time right here in September where it's still warm enough. There's still enough sunlight that plants actually start to grow. In my zone, every time I've tried to direct sow something or even put out starts in October, it's too late. They just don't have enough time to get growing and get going before that frost comes at the end of October. Technically, our first frost is the end of October, but it's one of those things where, depending on the year, we won't really even get a frost in November. Maybe we'll get a couple nights that are maybe just barely 32, barely freezing. A lot of times we actually have a really warm growing season all the way up through December. So that's what I'm kind of thinking at. If I plant these greens in a week or two, they'll grow up, they'll get big enough for me to start harvesting baby greens and start eating a little bit. And then I'll be able to kind of keep harvesting them all the way through until around New Year. Typically, if I have any of the kale, so I am going to try to plant a few different kales this year, and those will typically last the whole winter, and I can harvest on kales and collard greens all the way through the winter, even some mustard greens, all the way up until I tear them out to put in summer annuals. They'll just grow. And same with my violas and pansies. For me, those will just flower. They'll just keep flowering all the way through. So it's a really important time right now for me to start planning, thinking this through a little bit. And what I'm going to start doing today is starting the process of planning out my beds, cleaning out my beds a little bit. The garden is still really in a producing stage. My tomatoes are going crazy. I will show you them. They're actually going a little too crazy. They might be a little too happy. It's causing a few problems, but they're producing so much, so I don't want to pull them out. They're still flowering and growing fruit, and they're doing beautifully. I don't want to pull them out. I want to let them keep going. And there's a few other things, I have some basil that looks great. I don't want to tear any of that out, so I need to kind of figure out my container situation, what containers I'm going to keep going, and that I want to start planting fall greens into. I'm going to do a lot of greens in containers, the spaces where I want to put violas and pansies. I did have a bunch of violas, buddy, that I started from seed, and unfortunately I was gone for about 8 days, and my husband did a really good job taking care of all the pak choi and kale starts that I had, but the pansies and violas didn't make it, so that was really sad. But luckily there are tons and tons of pansy and violas at the garden centers around here. Come on, buddy. They grow really well here, and so they just stock them big time at all of those places. So I should be able to get a bunch of starts, and I want to put a lot of those in my flower beds actually. Maybe do a few kales and collard greens, but mostly violas. Last year I planted a bunch of lettuces, and actually I would have had a harvest probably all winter long because we had a really warm winter, but we had this one really cold snap right around Christmas and it took out a bunch of my lettuce. And that was kind of a bummer. And it made me realize that I just want to stock the beds at least with the things that I know are going to make it through the winter. So the kales, the collards, and the violas and pansies, probably mostly violas because they tend to keep flowering kind of like all through the winter. And the pansies sometimes they'll take a break in like January and February. They'll slow down and not flower. So starting to plan that out. I think I have a few more weeks until the garden centers start to really have the violas and pansies. So I don't need to worry about like clearing out the garden beds, but I just want to start the process of tidying things up a little bit. I need to pull out some of the dead growth from the tomatoes so that the rest of the tomatoes can keep going. At some point in September, I will start topping the tomatoes and just stopping them from any more growth and letting them just like set the fruit and ripen the fruit that's on the stems, but I'm not quite there yet. I just do want to clean out some of the diseased leaves because it's just getting crazy and it's pulling my trellis over. I will show you, my trellis is like falling over. So I need to handle that. And then I'm going to plant out a couple perennials that I had in containers and do some of those things. So I will show you all of that, but I just wanted to talk through this fall planning here inside before I got out. Sometimes it gets so loud out there that it's hard to chat through these like bigger topics. And I know from my experience fall gardening that it can be really frustrating to try to do a fall garden because the timing is a little different and you only have so much time until that frost is coming. If nothing else, I will say if you just want to dip your toe into a little bit of fall container gardening, do a couple containers with lettuce greens and start those maybe like if you have a long season like me, start them in your first week or two of September and let them grow. You can even put them in the shade for a little bit if you feel like they're getting a little bit stressed. And if you are in a colder climate with a shorter season, and you could get some started greens, you could put those in some containers and have a little bit of a container garden harvest as well without having to wait, because it does take a little bit of time for your greens, even to get baby greens to start from seed. So that's what I wanted to say about that. We're gonna go out into the garden and try to deal with this tomato trellis. I am really shocked that the tomatoes are still growing. Buddy. I'm shocked that the tomatoes are still growing as well as they are, given our heat. We have had, I don't know if it's been that much cooler of a summer, but the tomatoes do really well on the arch trellis and they get a little bit of morning shade. So they get a lot of afternoon sun, midday sun, afternoon sun, but they get a little bit of morning shade. And I think it might be just enough to kind of keep it just cool enough that they're still able to produce flowers and fruit even in the summer heat. So I'm gonna head out there and deal with all of that and we'll talk more in the garden. All right, so here is the tomato arch. It's honestly pretty epic. I don't often use that word, but I feel like, it's so, look at these, like they go up, they're all over, and they're fruiting. This is the Berry's Crazy Cherry. I don't even know how I'm gonna reach that to harvest it. They do seem to kind of fall down and then I'll be able to reach it. So I think I'm gonna try to get in here and do a little bit. I probably should try to harvest some of the tomatoes. Part of the issue now is that I can't even get in here to harvest tomatoes because it's like so just dense. And then it's also, there's starting to be some diseased branches. The arch is falling over and it's only staying upright really because the fence is here. There's so many spoon tomatoes. I'm gonna have volunteer spoon tomatoes in every corner of my garden, I'm pretty sure. And there's also cucamelons growing all over. Like getting this trellis off is gonna be, like when getting all the plants off this trellis when I'm done for the season is gonna be kind of crazy. But I think what I can do is come in and lighten it up a little bit. So take out, some of these branches. I'm not ready to top the tomatoes. I'm not ready to start stopping their growth just yet, as I said, but that will happen, I don't know, maybe some point in September. But for now, I think I'm just gonna try to come in. Like, I just gotta harvest though. Look at all these Juliet tomatoes. They are so gorgeous. They're the perfect like saladette. My daughter loves them. They're great. But it is just kind of crazy, and we've kind of gone past the point of I should start to handle this now. And then I think there's a little bit of other clean out I'm going to try to do, but this is the first step. We'll get this done, and then we'll see where we're at. And I also need to water. I keep thinking, we keep having these forecasts that it's going to rain, and then it doesn't, and so I keep not watering the containers, but then it doesn't rain. So I got to water out here too. But let's see if we can do something with this tomato arch. I don't even know how this is going to go. So I decided to start with just taking off a few of the leaves lower down. It was pretty obvious to see there were some just like yellow leaves and leaves that had some discoloration. And then I thought there were a few lower suckers growing off the main stem that I could probably go in and take off as well, that those probably wouldn't be getting a whole lot of fruit or anything on them. So I started taking after those a little bit as well, and just trying to take out all of those yellow leaves. There were also some cucamelons that weren't looking so good, so I took off a few of the cucamelon stems, and the bugs were just everywhere, getting all over me. That's the only problem with these kind of areas. There's lots of mosquitoes and lots of spiders that like to hang out in these kind of stems. And then I cut what I thought was a sucker, and I realized that it was actually a longer stem that had some fruit up at the top. And I realized that I had actually cut off some fruit that I didn't need to. And then I started to realize that maybe this was going to be a little bit harder than I thought it was. So I still was able to take off a few of the dead leaves on this side, and then I thought I would turn and try to go to really the much harder side, which is the one that's falling over, and it's just so thick and full of tomatoes. And I quickly started to realize that I didn't even know where to start, to be honest. And I could take out a few of the dead leaves, but it was so grown together and so thick that I almost couldn't separate out any of the dead leaves from the live leaves. I pulled out a few of the lower branches. There were some zinnias that had fallen over and some undergrowth down at the bottom, at the base of the plant, which is where a lot of the disease tends to be. So I thought that at least I could get that out and remove some of that growth. And then I just realized that I couldn't do much more. And I took a little bit out from the other side again, because that is a little bit thinner. There's no spoon tomato growing over there, so it's not as thick. I think on the right side of the arch trellis there's a spoon tomato, and that's where it's really, really thick, and that plant is just huge. And this is when I basically just gave up and started harvesting. Figured that if nothing else, I could harvest a few of the tomatoes, and of course I didn't have a harvest basket, but I just picked a few and decided to leave it there. I'm kind of giving up on pruning these. It's so crazy in here. There's just so much that, oh my gosh, now I'm getting ants all over me. It's so crazy in here. I don't think it's worth it to even try to prune out the dead leaves. If I got into it a bit earlier, maybe I could have salvaged the situation. I'm just going to try to harvest as many of the tomatoes as I can. The spoon tomatoes, whatever. We're just going to try to do that, and I am not going to worry about trying to trim out the dead growth. I don't think the arch trellis is actually broken. If it is broken at this point, then that's what it is. And I don't think, I'm not gonna be able to change it now. I'm just gonna try to keep harvesting these every day as I can, and enjoying them. And yeah, usually you can save it. Usually it's not this crazy, and usually you can come in and just save the tomato plants, and it's not a big deal, but I might have let it go too far. So I'm going to plant a couple plants and I'm going to water, and then we're just going to call that a day, and I will come back in my next video hopefully and do some more prep for the beds. I'm not going to handle the raised beds today, but we'll do more prep and just keep getting the garden ready for that fall planting. I did see one of my pumpkins. How cute! Just growing on the fence. Will I be able to get past the tomatoes to harvest it? You know, I don't know. That'll be the challenge. But I'm not gonna try to cut any of this growth out. It's definitely overgrown. I mean, this is what happens. I did not realize this is like, I think there's only one plant of the spoon plant. There's a spoon tomato, this is the spoon tomato, and a Juliet on this side, and it's completely wild. As long as I can sort of reach and harvest these, you know, that'll be good enough. We'll do that. So what plants that I'm going to plant today are a few of my container perennials. I've popped them over here. They're all looking a little rough right now, so I'm just gonna cut back what I need to, but we've got a few of the coral cream drop, or two of the coral cream drop phlox, and then my blackjack gold black-eyed Susan, and this is also where I transplanted over some of my other echinaceas and things. So I'm going to cut back the stalks that are dead. The transplanting actually went pretty well. I think most of the rudbeckias and echinaceas are doing okay, although I'm not sure that my Indian summer, I don't think the Indian summer rudbeckia, I got enough of a root system. I'm a little disappointed about that. I actually may try to start a couple more for next year and show you how I'm going to do that using my Unheated Greenhouse, which I'm going to get going soon. So that'll be a fun project, just have a couple in there. But really the only reason I am doing the coral cream drop phlox into the ground instead of keeping them in the containers is just that I just want some of that pink interest over here, and I think it's a perfect spot to have that perennial interest. I realized that, you know, for next year I want to be doing some more different types of annual flowers and stuff in the containers, so I just want to free up some of the container space. So that's why I'm planting the perennials out there. And then the blackjack gold just isn't looking great, so I don't know if it just doesn't do well in the container setting, or if I did something wrong. I think it just maybe is one that the container setting wasn't the best place for it. So we're just gonna get those planted in there. Nothing super special about that process, but just a little update on those container perennials. If you've been following along with the container perennial journey, I had so much fun planting perennials in containers last year, and for the most part they've done really well. And then I just kind of ran into the problem that I thought I was going to have, which is that I have a small garden, and so giving up that space to a perennial, then I was left wanting to plant annuals in those containers and different food crops and stuff. So I figured I'll just pop them out into the garden bed, and then we'll enjoy them there and just use some more perennials next year. So I'm just gonna get those, find my trowel, and then we'll get those planted in. Isn't the coleus with the sweet potato vine pretty? I love that combination. So I got everything planted in, and it doesn't look perfect right now, but it certainly will get better and better, and next year it will look great. The cucamelons are wild. Those will probably continue to take things over, and then the blackjack gold are beautiful. So that is nice. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.